The first night I came back from war, I didn't expect silence to feel louder than gunfire. It hit me the moment I stepped out of the taxi, an eerie, suffocating stillness wrapped around the neighborhood like a heavy blanket. No distant explosions, no shouted commands, no boots crunching on gravel. Just the soft hum of streetlights and the occasional bark of a dog far away. It should have felt like peace. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt wrong. And then my neighbor leaned over the fence, his face half hidden in shadow, and whispered something that made my chest tighten before I even understood why. "Don't expect much sleep tonight. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of people trying to heal, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be heard, and sometimes, they change more than just the person listening." I didn't respond to him right away. I just stood there with my duffel bag hanging from my shoulder, staring at the house I hadn't seen in 3 years. The paint was peeling in places. The porch light flickered faintly, like it was tired of doing its job. The small garden my mother once kept so carefully had turned into a mess of overgrown weeds. It looked like a place that had been waiting too long. "What do you mean?" I finally asked, my voice quieter than I intended. The neighbor didn't answer directly. He just gave me a look, one of those looks people give when they don't know how to say something out loud, and then slowly stepped back into his house, closing the door as if he'd already said too much. That was the first moment something inside me shifted. Not fear exactly. More like a dull, familiar unease. The kind that had kept me alive in places where hesitation meant death. I unlocked the front door, and the smell hit me first. Dust. Old wood. A faint trace of something burnt, like a memory lingering in the walls. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. I told myself it was just my imagination. After everything I'd seen, everything I'd survived, my mind wasn't exactly a reliable narrator anymore. War doesn't end when you leave it. It just follows you home and waits for the lights to go out. I dropped my bag near the couch and walked slowly through the house, each step echoing louder than it should have. The living room was mostly untouched, but there were signs of time everywhere. A thin layer of dust covered the shelves. The clock on the wall had stopped at some forgotten hour. My old photos still hung where they always had, frozen versions of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I paused in front of one, me and my younger sister, both smiling like we didn't know how fragile happiness could be. She had moved away years ago, started a new life somewhere far from all this. I hadn't blamed her then. I didn't blame her now. Some places are easier to leave than to stay. By the time night settled in fully, I was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. My body ached, my mind buzzed, and yet, when I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't relax. The silence was too perfect. And then it broke. At first, it was faint. So faint I thought I imagined it. A soft sound, like something scraping lightly against wood. I held my breath, listening. It came again. A slow, dragging noise. My heart rate picked up instantly. Every instinct I had screamed at me to move, to react, to identify the threat. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was my home. I sat up slowly, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. The sound seemed to be coming from somewhere outside, maybe the backyard. I told myself it was just an animal. A stray cat, maybe. Or the wind moving something loose. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Because the sound had a rhythm. A pattern. And it was getting closer. I got out of bed and moved toward the window, careful, quiet, like I had done 1,000 times before in places where the wrong move could cost everything. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. At first, I saw nothing. Just the dim outline of the yard, the fence, the shadows stretching across the ground. And then I saw it. A figure. standing near the edge of the fence. Not moving. Just standing there. My breath caught in my throat. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Was it someone watching me? Someone who knew I was back? Someone who didn't want me here? I blinked, trying to focus. And then the figure moved. Slowly. It stepped forward into the weak glow of the streetlight, and I felt something inside me collapse in on itself. It wasn't a threat. It was a child. A small, thin boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing barefoot in the cold, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and even from that distance, I could see something in them that I recognized instantly. Fear. Not the kind that passes quickly. The kind that stays. I opened the window without thinking. "Hey," I called out softly, not wanting to startle him. He didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me like he wasn't sure if I was real. I stepped outside slowly, keeping my hands visible, my movements calm. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice gentler now. Still nothing. The boy took a small step back, like he was ready to run. "It's all right," I said. "You're safe." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. Safe wasn't something I believed in anymore. But in that moment, I needed him to believe it. He hesitated, then looked over his shoulder toward the house next door, the same house where my neighbor had warned me just hours earlier. That's when I understood. And suddenly, his words made sense. "Don't expect much sleep tonight." It wasn't about me. It was about him. The boy finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. He said he couldn't go back inside. He said he tried, but every time he closed his eyes, the shouting started again. The crashing. The things that broke. The things that couldn't be fixed. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger exactly. Not yet. Just a heavy, familiar weight. I had heard those sounds before. Different place. Different faces. Same fear. I knelt down slowly, bringing myself to his level. "You don't have to go back tonight," I said quietly. He looked at me like he didn't quite believe me. "Stay here," I added. "Just for tonight." That was how it started. Not with a plan. Not with some grand act of heroism. Just a tired soldier who couldn't sleep and a scared kid who needed somewhere to breathe. The first night, he didn't say much. He sat on the couch, wrapped in an old blanket, his eyes darting to every sound. I stayed nearby, pretending to sort through my things, giving him space but not leaving him alone. Every so often, he would flinch. And every time, I felt it too. Because trauma doesn't recognize distance. It doesn't care if the danger is gone. It stays, buried deep, waiting for the smallest reminder to pull it back to the surface. As the hours passed, something strange happened. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. The silence wasn't as heavy. And for the first time since I got back, I didn't feel like I was fighting something invisible. I was just there. With him. The nights that followed weren't easier, not really. The sounds from next door didn't stop. The shouting came and went like a storm that refused to pass. Sometimes it was loud enough to make the walls tremble. Other times, it was just low enough to creep under the door and settle into your bones. The boy kept coming back. At first, he would wait outside, unsure if he was still welcome. But I always opened the door before he could knock. Eventually, he stopped waiting. He would slip in quietly, like he had always belonged there. I learned his name. I learned the way his shoulders tensed at certain noises, the way he avoided talking about anything that happened inside his house, the way he tried to be smaller than he was, like taking up less space might keep him safer. And without realizing it, I started to change too. I slept a little more. I ate regularly. I started fixing things around the house, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because it felt like maybe this place didn't have to stay broken. Because maybe neither did I. But healing isn't a straight line. And just when things started to feel almost normal, everything fell apart. One night, the noise next door was different. Not just shouting. Something worse. Something final. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment to comment something simple, maybe just, kindness matters, or, someone out there needs help. You never know who might read it and feel less alone. That night, the boy didn't come. I waited longer than usual, sitting by the door, listening. The silence felt wrong again, heavier than before. And then I heard sirens. Loud. Urgent. Getting closer. My stomach dropped. I ran outside, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with war. The flashing lights lit up the street, turning everything into a blur of red and blue. The neighbor's house was surrounded. People were shouting. Doors were slamming. Someone was crying. And all I could think about was him. I pushed through the small crowd, ignoring the looks, the questions. None of it mattered. Where is he? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. No one answered directly. But then I saw him. Sitting on the curb. Alone. Wrapped in a blanket that wasn't his. His face was blank in a way that terrified me more than fear ever could. I walked toward him slowly, my chest tight, my mind racing. When he looked up and saw me, something cracked in his expression. Not relief. Not exactly. More like recognition. Like he knew he wasn't completely alone anymore. I sat beside him without saying anything. Because sometimes, words aren't what people need. Sometimes, they just need someone to stay. And that's what I did. I stayed. Through the questions, through the chaos, through the long, quiet hours that followed. I stayed when he didn't speak. I stayed when he finally did. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't understood when I first came home. The war hadn't ended for me. But maybe, just maybe. This was how I learned to live with it. Not by forgetting. Not by running. But by choosing, every single day, to be there for someone who needed it. Even when it was hard. Even when it hurt. Because sometimes, healing doesn't come from fixing yourself. Sometimes, it comes from helping someone else survive. And if this story moved you even a little, don't just scroll away. Like, share, and leave a comment, because stories like this remind us that even in the darkest nights, someone can still choose to be the light. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.